The Indianapolis Colts have their new defensive coordinator in Lou Anarumo. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first post-announcement listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of HorseshoeHuddle.com, and my partner in crime, Jake Arthur, is our credentialed boots on the ground for the site as well. We have a fun show for you guys planned out. We're talking all about Lou Anarumo, the Colts' new defensive coordinator. We're going to talk about potential pieces the Colts need to add to this puzzle to make his defense whole this next season, what this hiring means for the current personnel on the roster, and how this can work out. But also, we're going to just talk about Lou Anarumo in general as well. And, I might change my name for this episode, Jake, to Nostradamus. I think that's a better fitting thing because the last time we talked to you guys, I made the prediction that by Monday, the Colts would hire Lou Anarumo. It even ended up working even better. I said they might be waiting on Dennis Allen, but if Allen goes elsewhere, then they'll go to Lou Anarumo. And those announcements came right back to back today. So not to pat myself too much on the back here. Obviously, I knew everything that was going on, but Lou Anarumo, the Colts' new defensive coordinator, he was with the Cincinnati Bengals from 2019 to 2024. Overall, and Jake, we'll get into this in a second. Overall, not a super successful stint with the Bengals. Like, there were some growing pains early on, and there were some rough patches in the later parts, which is why he's kind of available right now. But if we want to really push optimism on this signing, or on this hiring, for a better term there, 2021 Bengals and 2022 Bengals were the peak of his powers, I guess. The mad scientist, Lou Anarumo, that's where he was called the mad scientist, for what he was able to do in those two seasons with the Bengals. He was the architect behind that Bengals defense that essentially dragged, again, it feels weird to say this, but a bad Bengals offense in that postseason to the Super Bowl and nearly got them a Super Bowl championship. And then the next season in 2022, they had a very strong defense and went all the way to the AFC Championship game the next season as well. Lou Anarumo, again, for the imperfectness that started his tenure with the Bengals and for the end of his tenure, during that two-season stretch, the Bengals are one of the best defenses in football.
Yeah, they really were. They had a complete unit that was clicking on all cylinders. And this is when I think of defenses who kind of had quick turnarounds, this is when I think of one that has used free agency really, really well to make modest signings come together to make a really cohesive full defense. And I know there's going to be parts of the Colts fan base where this isn't a very popular pick. When we've talked about Anarumo over the last couple weeks, people have been like, yeah, but he cost the Bengals a playoff spot, this season and everything. There's layers to this, basically. Now, schematically and ability to adapt and move guys around and do creative things, Anarumo is beyond what Gus Bradley was doing. But it comes down to personnel. I mean, the Bengals lost several really important starting defenders over the last couple years. They lost Jesse Bates, one of the top free safeties in the NFL. Chidobe Awuzie, DJ Reader, Eli Apple, Von Bell left and came back. So a lot of this guy's most important pieces, communicators, leaders on that defense, they were shown the door. I mean, the offense had a ton of money funneled into it, but there is gray area as to why, statistically it didn't always look pretty. But this is a guy who holds guys accountable, which is one of the biggest things you want to see here. He's a leader. You said the mad scientist moniker, that's from his players. That's the players always felt like this guy had an effective creative game plan for them going into each week. He had guys really bought into what his plans were. And you think of a lot of big games, like the Kansas City Chiefs, There's been games against, the Ravens and some AFC powerhouses, not always against the Ravens, but
Sometimes it's hard. Lamar Jackson's tough.
when you face each other twice a year, there's a lot that can happen. But
yeah.
I see Anarumo as a guy who is able to kind of get some misfits together and perform really well. And also his teams rose to the challenge in big moments a lot, I felt. So this is maybe not a hire where it's going to look pretty 24/7. But I think overall this is going to be a really good move in the right direction for this defense. And you're going to see some guys maybe maximize their potential. Even, free agents, you don't have to get a bunch of high price guys, but the more modest signings, I think that might come in a little more, and they're going to get the most out of those guys, hopefully.
Yeah. And let me contextualize his tenure with the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm going to do so in a way that I think would make Bengals and Colts fans pretty happy with. I'm going to be fair to both sides here. So Lou Anarumo comes in 2019 with Zach Taylor. And the Bengals on defense were an older unit that just wasn't very good yet. They had to refresh a lot of the group on that side of the ball in terms of free agent signings, in terms of draft picks. They hit on several draft picks, linebacker Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, Jesse Bates, Cam Taylor, Britt. Like, those were guys they drafted who came in and did some good things. And they also had some good signings that were productive for them. Eli Apple, DJ Reader was a huge one. Chidobe Awuzie was a signing as well that came in. I think he came from the Cowboys.
Yep.
So when they had all of those things come together with the draft hits, along with big time signings in 2021, in 2022, it was a very good unit. They really started to figure out in the second half of 2021 how good of a unit they could be. And then you look at that playoff run to the Super Bowl. I think they had like 7 turnovers forced in the 3 games leading up to the Super Bowl. There was a game against the Tennessee Titans, who were, I think, were the 1 seed that year. Where the Bengals had like 6 sacks in that game too. It was a really, really strong playoff run, carried over to 2022, did some really good things. And then you started seeing the talent depart from the defense. Now, as a defensive coordinator, you need to adjust to that. There needs to be adjustment. And they did bring in younger players for him to supplant those veterans with. Dax Hill, they didn't really figure out a way to utilize him until this past season. Until the second half of this past season. So, Lou Anarumo certainly deserves some fault for what happened with the Bengals this season. It's not only because talent departed, but I will say when he did start to stubbornly move off of some of the veterans that he had in place early this season, because again, your choice was a lot of these veteran players that have been productive for him or younger players who may not have been ready. It took some time to move to those younger players. And we did see in the second half of this season, the Bengals defense did start to creep back up towards the middle of the road in EPA per play with a lot of younger players. And again, without that top talent like the DJ Reader, Chidobe Awuzie, and the Jesse Bates of the world. So I think overall it was a pretty successful tenure with the Bengals. It certainly made sense why they wanted to move on, because most of this year was not great. But he was able to right the ship a little bit towards the end of the season when the Bengals were making their playoff stretch or their playoff push late in the year. So, again, there was the peaks and valleys of his tenure with the Bengals. I wouldn't say it was like some superstar home run tenure, but it had some really, really great moments. And I think even when, the struggles did start to happen late in 2023 and for the first half of 2024, he did find a way to right the ship. Now, it was a little too late, obviously, this season, but they did find a way to find some success late this season when the Bengals were pushing for the playoffs. So Lou Anarumo, in my opinion, and we're going to get into more of the film stuff here in a second, like the schematic stuff in segment 2, but in my opinion, a very good defensive coach. I wouldn't say he's like a top tier, like number 1 defensive coordinator in football, but like you said, Jake, he gets his units ready to play for big matchups. He does perform pretty well in the playoffs. And when he's had the personnel in the past, he's been able to put out some really strong defenses for the Bengals. So I think this is a really good hire. I feel much better about this hire than I did about the Gus Bradley hire a couple years ago. And honestly, Lou Anarumo, for my money, aside from Dennis Allen, was the best defensive coordinator on the market. I very, very much like this hire, and I think it's going to be very good for the Colts. I think this was a Shane Steichen-led hire. I think this is who Shane Steichen wanted. And you guys are going to get a more aggressive defensive coach who is more willing to adapt on defense. So everything the Colts fans have kind of wanted, aside from like a Wink Martindale, like 70% blitz rate, like they're not going to get that, but you're going to get a more adaptable defensive coach, which I think is much better than what we've had here with the static defenses of Gus Bradley and even Matt Eberflus before that.
Yeah, all I know is I got to see this defense up close and personal back in August when the Colts were in Cincinnati for the joint practice in the preseason. And the Bengals defense had the Colts offense's number. Let's just say that. There was a very viral moment of a lot of smack talk coming from the Bengals defense. But we're going to get talking about more here in a moment about what this means for current Colts, the roster altogether, the players that are on there, and then what they still need to bring in to kind of make this thing work. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. And that's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I've personally used LinkedIn Jobs myself on both sides of the coin, hiring and being hired. And I can tell you it's a game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. Small businesses are wearing a lot of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn gets it, and that's why they connect you with the best candidates using your data that you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests to the connections that you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn has helped them find a high-quality candidate. Again, I know from experience how important it is to make that right hiring decision. And having access to the insights like what skills they have or how they're connected to your network, that helps quite a bit to make you feel confident in the hire that you've made and just pulling that trigger and getting the right person on board. So hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
And Locked On Colts fans, it's playoff time. And if you're like me, you want to make the most out of these final few weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the game, PrizePicks is for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and whether you're looking for a flex play to boost out your payout or want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Our fantasy expert, Jake Arthur, was 1-1 this past week with his playoff predictions. He was
one
eyeing
of two.
Yeah, one and one. Sorry,
Yeah.
1-1. Yeah, 1 for 2, obviously. He was eyeing Jahmyr Gibbs more than 0.5 rushing or receiving touchdowns in this game. Cha-ching. There we go, Jake. That was good. And he had Saquon Barkley less than 111 rushing yards. I'm pretty sure Barkley had more than that on like 2 carries.
I meant in the first quarter.
Yes, he meant on 1 carry maybe in this game. Barkley almost went for 300, it felt like, in that one. So Jake was a little off on that one there. But if you guys want to take a shot and be better than Jake this next week, here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. Again, download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, Locked On Colts Everydayers, we are back talking Lou Anarumo for defensive coordinator. And before we get into how we can maximize certain players, before we get into guys they could bring in, let's talk about his scheme, at least generally here. We have a whole off season to bring on a bunch of different nerds to talk about the scheme more explicitly here on the show. But just generally talking about his scheme, it's not the biggest shift from Gus Bradley in terms of, we're not going from a single high structure to a 2 high structure as the base defense. Lou Anarumo still is more of a single high type of guy, except it's a little bit more aggressive in that single high in terms of, what they're going to do in the fronts and on the back end. There's a little bit more pre-snap disguise. There's more cover 1 man than there is cover 3. So it still has, again, that single high structure, but you're going to have a little bit more man coverage. So everyone last year who was begging for the Colts to use Jalen Jones and Juju Brents, I mean, not Juju Brents, but Jalen Jones and Samuel Womack in press man coverage, Lou Anarumo is your guy. He's going to play more man. He's going to play more press. He's going to put these guys more on an island to showcase what they can do. And, that can have varying degrees of success, but it's not going to be, what I've seen Colts fans complain about for the last couple of seasons, that soft zone coverage.
Yeah.
This will get after guys a little bit more. And when they do run zone coverage, there'll be a lot of matching concepts in there. There'll be a lot of spinners and crazy, pre-snap disguise type stuff that, they'll look like they're going to be running basic cover one man, and then it'll shift into a cover two zone, post snap and really muddy the water for quarterbacks. When it comes to a matchup thing, I think you can really look at how he's attacked Pat Mahomes over the past couple of seasons in terms of he always has a different game plan for Pat Mahomes that is best utilized for his defense. He's not the type of defensive coordinator who's going to be like Gus Bradley where, hey, we're going to run an 80% cover 3 every single week. And maybe we'll be unique with those 20% of other plays, but for the most part, we're going to be cover 3. That's more of Gus Bradley. That's the static defense that Gus Bradley is. When it comes to Lou Anarumo, a lot of what he does is based on opponent. He does a lot of offseason scouting of opponent offenses. He gets game plans ready for opposing offenses in the offseason, and then they kind of adjust from week to week how they're going to approach teams. So you could have one week where they're going to be in a 2-high structure for 80% of the plays. You could have one week where they're going to blitz at like a 40% rate. You could have another week where they're going to be running man the entire game. It's not that it always works, but he does design his game plan specifically for opponent rather than sitting in the same structure. So overall, I think when you look at Lou Anarumo's defense, it's going to be diverse. It's going to be different. There's going to be a mixture of aggression in there, and there's going to be a little bit more man, which I know a lot of you guys have been wanting for a couple of years now.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the players who he's really just tapped them out potential-wise and really got the most out of these guys. So DJ Reader was a big-time nose tackle for him. Obviously moved on, I think, to the Lions. But Reader was a top 5 nose tackle in the NFL. So obviously that screams Grover Stewart. That's a guy that knows how to use them. Trey Hendrickson has become annually one of the top sack artists in the NFL. They still got to get something out of Latu. Like Anarumo showing up is not just going to magically make Latu super productive. But the fact that they've had some defensive linemen, you could throw like Larry Ogunjobi in there. Sam Hubbard has had some big moments. He's gotten a lot out of some defensive linemen, especially when it comes to getting after guys in the backfield. Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt are 2 guys I think of right away when I'm like, these are linebackers I didn't necessarily think we're going to do like really big things in the NFL, but they have really they've really ascended their game under Anarumo. And then the backfield, the secondary, you look at some free agent additions that have really panned out. Eli Apple, who was a bust everywhere. No one really thought much of Eli Apple anymore, but he goes to Cincinnati. He kind of rehabs his image. Chidobe Awuzie coming from the Cowboys. Mike Hilton has been one of the top nickels in the game. It seems like every nickel that Anarumo has had, primarily Mike Hilton, anyone filling in, has done generally well. And then you're looking at safeties, Jesse Bates and Von Bell, really productive guys when they're there playing for him. So when you look at that and you look at what the Colts have, do they match up well? Like, we'll get to like what they need to replace and what they need to bring in the third segment. But as far as guys currently on the roster, what are you thinking there?
Yeah, I think they have a couple guys that'll fit really well with Anarumo's type of system. I think Kenny Moore is going to be a perfect fit just in terms of Kenny Moore's ability to play man, play zone, be a disguised blitzer, be a guy who does blitz, be a guy who can defend the run. I mean, Kenny Moore is going to be a weapon in this defense under Lou Anarumo. I think it'll be similar to how we saw Kenny Moore used under Matt Eberflus, more so than how we saw him used under Gus Bradley, where, Kenny was kind of a static player under Gus Bradley. I think Anarumo will acknowledge that Kenny can be more of a weapon for your defense. And I think that's how he'll be used, especially in the run game. He'll be a big part of the run game, obviously. A lot of run fit blitzes, a lot of coming off the edge and fitting against anything that's thrown at them. So Kenny Moore, I think, will be a really good player in this system. You mentioned DJ Reader was great for the Bengals under Anarumo. Grover Stewart is just a perfect fit for what they want to do there. I actually think Zaire Franklin will be fine in this system too. Like he can do the base things that are required in coverage, and then in the run game, if you can get him some free shots, he'll be good. But I'm really intrigued by Latu, what they could do with him. When you look at what Latu did in college, he was a stand-up rusher that moved all across the defensive line on passing downs at UCLA. I mean, he would stand up over the center one snap. He'd stand up at the wide 9. He'd be standing up at the 3 tech. They used him all over the place in UCLA, and that's where he was really productive. I think we could see Anarumo get back to some of that stuff. I mean, again, Anarumo gets into these like crazy blitz packages when he does use them. And there'll be times where he brings 3 rushers and it'll be like 1 defensive lineman and 2 linebackers. It'd be like really interesting blitzes. And I think you can move Latu around a little bit to really fit some of these blitz schemes and what Anarumo wants to bring. So yeah, I think those are the guys who really stand out, but Kenny Moore for sure will be a big time player. Jalen Jones as well as another guy. I think who will be doing pretty good with, more press, more bump and run, more responsibilities at outside corner. I think he can really shine in that way. But outside of that, I do think they need some more help on this defense, and we're going to talk about that coming up in just a second.
From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. And the FanDuel app is easy to navigate. They've got a variety of bets that keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around for your winnings, which can be the most aggravating part of it all. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement for the playoffs, FanDuel's got you covered. Again, I had a big hit on FanDuel last week. We talked about the Lions had that huge spread against the Commanders. I did say I thought the Lions would win, but that there was no way they were going to win by the margin against the Commanders. That it was like 8.5, I think. It was a big one. But as you saw, the Commanders were up for the challenge and actually took the whole thing. So if you've got a little hunch like that, if you got a feeling, go to FanDuel and earn some money. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Zach, one of the funnest parts of the offseason is obviously gabbing about which free agents that the team should add. And the Colts really can't sit on their hands on this one because they have a new defensive coordinator. When you get a new coordinator on a side of the ball, you've got to give them something. So just right away looking at guys who have direct ties to Anarumo. Defensive tackle B.J. Hill from the Bengals is a free agent, and then defensive ends Joseph Osai and Cam Sample are as well. Osai and Sample are just kind of guys. They would be for the Colts kind of at the bottom of your defensive end rotation. B.J. Hill would be interesting. You add Hill in there with Buckner and Grover Stewart. That essentially gives you 3 starting defensive tackles you can rotate. Now, that's going to take some things away from being able to rush the passer. So it obviously is something you got to consider heavily allocating those expenses there. But that's really interesting to me. That's something they haven't really tried before, and they've lacked depth on the inside. So that, B.J. Hill, if we're looking at guys with direct Anarumo connections, that one's pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, aside from that, though, there's not too many out there. But one thing I will say for sure is, again, if we're going to be honest about Lou Anarumo, last season was not a great year, and a lot of it came down to having guys missing a lot of tackles, a lot of young guys who weren't ready for the system, and a lot of guys who just weren't ready to play, especially early in the season, or a lot of veterans that were letting down. Like it was kind of all encompassing, but there was a lot of missed tackles on that Bengals defense last year. And where this Colts defense stands right now, there's a lot of missed tackles on this Colts defense currently. So for this thing to work, they do need to bring in some more reliable veterans, in particular at free safety. Free safety is, we were saying this all last offseason. The Colts needed a free safety. We were saying next to Julian Blackmon at the time. Now they need a new free safety next to Nick Cross, who is solidified at strong safety at this point. Lou Anarumo's system was at its best with Jesse Bates. And I know that is a huge hole to fill. I mean, Jesse Bates is arguably the best free safety in football. So we're not saying go out there and get Jesse. I mean, if you can get Jesse Bates, awesome. But it doesn't have to be a Jesse Bates type player, but like they need a rangy free safety who can kind of do at least what Bates was doing early on in his tenure with the Bengals before he was all pro Jesse Bates. Like they need a rangy ball hawk over the middle of the field for this system to work, especially when they're going to play more man coverage. They're going to play more single high stuff. You need to have a guy who has that sideline to sideline range. And there are some guys in this draft. There are some free agents. I know you have the list in front of you here, Jake. I don't think it's perfect, obviously, because again, Bates is a hard guy to find out there. But they certainly need a free safety. I think they need another coverage linebacker, another athletic guy who can move over the middle. I mean, Anarumo gets kind of he gets a little. He has a lot of different linebackers play on his defense. Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson are the main guys, but they've had a lot of linebackers over the years. I think Zaire Franklin and Jalen Carlisle are two good guys to have right now for him. But I think you need more, like another third guy in there that can cover, that can turn and run, who can be a little bit more diverse in the second level of the defense. I think those are big. And then veterans at corner. They need to have more than just, I mean, right now, at least in my mind, all they have is Sam Womack and Jalen Jones on the outside. I can't even count Juju Brents right now because he's just never been healthy. So you need to have more bodies at corner, because if one of these two guys, or I mean, heaven forbid, both of these guys do not fit this system, I mean, look, if these guys can't play man or these guys can't work in this system, the Colts are screwed next season. Like, you need more veteran corners in here. I'm not saying you have to go get an Eli Apple, because I don't even know if Eli Apple's in the league, but like a veteran type of player like that, just a guy who's been there, done that, a guy who has the athleticism to turn and run, a guy who might surprise in camp, and who knows, if they don't work out, sign like 3 of them. So if one of them doesn't work out, you can cut them and you can have the other 2. Like, it doesn't need to be these top tier free agents, but sign like 2 or 3 guys to decent deals, or 1 or 2 guys to decent deals. Get them in camp, get them competing, and see who works best for this system. But they need some veterans in the secondary for sure, some guys who can operate in this new scheme. I mean, a lot of these Colts defenders have been running static defense their whole career, and it's going to be a big shift for them, going back to maybe what they did in college, or maybe doing stuff they've never really done before. So you're going to need more veterans in the room to at least help that transition. You're going to need a veteran linebacker who can turn and run a little bit, and they need a free safety. I know a lot of people are saying Xavier Watts from Notre Dame. That would be a fantastic one in there. Malachi Starks from Georgia would be awesome. There's a lot of good free safeties out there. The Colts need somebody next to Nick Cross, though, for this defense to work.
Yeah, and I think luckily this is a good offseason to need some veteran corner help, because there are guys out there, DJ Reed, Charvarius Ward, Rasul Douglas, and Carlton Davis. Now, Davis and Ward have both won a Super Bowl, so that also gives you guys with the been there, done that championship pedigree, because part of what we talked about, not just us, but people who talk about the Colts in general, DeForest Buckner is really the only guy on their team who's ever accomplished anything, and even he didn't win the Super Bowl. So Ward and Davis have won a Super Bowl. Rasul Douglas has got playoff experience, so those are some guys that can bring it to you. You're looking at linebacker, Dre Greenlaw. If you give him last year as his comeback from Achilles year, and that it's kind of widely expected that you need a year until you look like yourself again. So Dre Greenlaw for a 2-year stretch was one of the best linebackers in football. If his medical's clear and you think that he is recovered from that Achilles, I think he's worth looking at. The same thing when you're looking at the 49ers defense. Now this is more of an end box creative playmaker type, but Talona Hufanga from the 49ers, again, all pro in 2022, one of the best safeties in football for that 2-year stretch. He had an ACL, which is, easier to recover from than Achilles. So these are 2 guys who are now a year removed from their big injuries. They have perennial playoff experience, good leaders by what my understanding is, researching them over the weekend. So there are guys out there that they could get that would be a really good fit for the locker room and for what they need on the field.
Yeah, and one more thing I will add to going away from free agency, because You never know with Chris Ballard. You
Yeah.
just never know. I'm not going to put too much hope into that, but I will say an asset to having a guy like Anarumo in there for the draft room is the Bengals have been pretty good at drafting defensive backs when Anarumo was their defensive coordinator. Now, is that him developing? Is that him having a say in the draft room? I know there have been some reports that he's really good working with defensive backs and also really good at scouting them in the draft. So that could be an asset for the Colts, who have struggled to draft defensive backs in Chris Ballard's tenure. I mean, they certainly have struggled at the cornerback position. Safety's been a little bit more hit or miss, but they certainly could use another asset in that draft room in Lou Anarumo, who was the guy who was there when they drafted Jesse Bates, who was there when they drafted Cam Taylor-Britt. Like, these are two really good players that they have that they had the Bengals. So we can see if that works out for the Colts come draft day. But you guys let us know what you think in the comment section. What are you thinking about Lou Anarumo? I know there was not the most warm sentiment for him leading up into this process, but for me personally, I do like this hire. I think Lou Anarumo is a good defensive coach. And as long as the Colts commit to bringing in some outside help, I think this can be a pretty good defensive turnaround for the Colts this upcoming season. But we do want to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. Next, go find Locked On NFL. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. And if you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop, follow the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings and reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.